Hi guys, it's Kasim. Welcome back again to my channel. I hope all is well. As you can probably tell, I've had to make changes to the background today. It just so happens that you know how life is sometimes. Sometimes life can be hectic. Sometimes you have to record somewhere else. But I'm still committed to delivering the 52 different journal entries that I promised you guys. So there's so much that I want to talk about, but before we get into it, and just to remind you of why I started journal entries in the first place, I started journal entries because essentially I live by a philosophy that human beings have this amazing ability to develop lessons, experiences, stories, ideas, to extract principles and basics and rules that work every single time in their lives. And I recognize that not everybody is going to become powerful and rich and reach the highest echelons of life. Just not everybody can do that. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's not possible, but it means that not everybody is going to do that. But every single one of us can extract these incredible lessons from our lives and these principles and these keys that we can pass on to our children, that we can pass on to the next generation. And they can actually begin life off not from a minus, but also from maybe a 2 or 3 in their own life. Now, I'm not talking about giving your children everything, because I don't think that is healthy or productive, and having spoiled kids, of course, causes all kinds of problems. But I do think that we can leverage the principles and the keys that we've learned and the ideas and the lessons, and we can extract those from our lives and pass them on to the next generation. I actually think that that is far much more valuable to the next generation than giving them money or helping them in terms of positioning them and in terms of business and giving them, you know, the position of a president in a company. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about and share with you. But as I said, there's loads of things that I want to talk about. I don't even think I'm going to have time to talk about them in this episode, but I'm going to do my very best. So I want to begin off by talking a little bit about the difference between mental health and mental illness. And I say this because many of you will be aware that I work for a company in the UK, a mental health company. And in that company, I go to schools and organizations and charities, and I speak to people about mental health. And I speak to them about how to improve their mental health and how to seek peer-to-peer support. And one of the things that has become apparent to me as I've gone and spoken to adults, as I've gone and spoken to young people, is the amount of people that confuse the difference between mental health and mental illness. And so I've really been thinking a lot about this and how what society has got to where it is because of this erroneous zone, because of this error in judgment. So mental illness is diagnosed. Mental illness is an illness that is usually genetic. So that can be something like psychosis, it can be something like ADHD, it can be any of the disorders that are usually clinically diagnosed. Mental health is to do with how we look after ourselves. And how we look after ourselves, of course, determines a lot of the experience that we have in our lives. Every single one of us is going to have mental health, right? There is nobody who's got an exception, but not everybody is going to have a mental illness diagnosed with them. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about myself is, Kasim, is really around this concept of self-care. And I've been thinking a lot about, well, Kasim, what are you doing to ensure that you look after yourself? You know, what are you doing to ensure that you are healthy, that you are protecting your mind, that you are protecting your health, that you're protecting your emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being? And it's something that I would encourage you to really consider and think about. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday, particularly as I was reflecting on this, is at some point we have to get to a point where we take control of our mental health. And the question that I ask you is, at what point is that supposed to be? You know, in life, they say that there is, I guess, 3 stages that we go through. We go through being a dependent on our parents. We then get to a stage where we become interdependent, and in a state, we go from dependent to independent to interdependent. And I ask you to reflect on and think about in your own life, what stage of that you're at. What stage of that should you be responsible for your mental health? Now look, I get it. Every workplace, every business, other people within our communities should have some part to play in our mental health, right? However, I very strongly believe that the majority of how our mental health turns out has to be dependent on us as individuals. I think that we have to take accountability for, are we ensuring that we are maintaining a healthy lifestyle? Are we eating the right food? Are we surrounding ourselves with the right people? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we consuming the right content? Are we misusing certain things like social media? Are we misusing substances? Now, look, all of these things, and I think this is where a lot of us get confused and get kind of in this cognitive dissonance, is a lot of us tend to go to the extreme and say, well, Kasim, we shouldn't use social media at all, or you shouldn't drink at all. Look, having one coffee is really not a problem, right? Having a paracetamol every now and then is really not a problem. Having a beer or a glass of wine every now and then is not a problem. Where it becomes an issue is where you're consistently having a beer every single day. And not only that, but you are having 3, 4, 5 beers every single day, right? And you have to be so intelligent and so clever that you don't allow your mind to try to trick you into having that philosophy of being healthy during the week and then binging and going absolutely crazy on the weekend. Because the problem is that, let's say you are really healthy during the week and your health is a 9 out of 10. If you go to a 50 out of 10 on the weekend, it cancels it out. And now your average actually tends to be like a 2 or 3 out of 10. Does that kind of make sense what I mean? I don't know if that kind of makes sense. But I just very strongly believe that so many of us are just not looking after ourselves. We're not observing how people around us are affecting us, how our mental health is affecting us, how social media is affecting us, how what we're eating is affecting our emotional state. And look, it's ultimately your life, and I've always said to everybody, you can do whatever the hell you want with your life. It's your life. But I just encourage you, in this lifetime, position yourself so that you can live the most remarkable life. There's so much abundance and joy and excitement and fruit and opportunity in this world, and I just think a lot of people don't take advantage of it, right? I don't think a lot of us leverage ourselves to take advantage of it. I think so many people spend their lives suffering in apathy, in denial. So many of us spend our lives in worry, in anxiety, in stress, when we could live our lives in joy, in abundance, in gratitude, right? Now, that doesn't mean that that is the right thing for every single one of us. And as I've said before, you have to look at your life individually and figure out what the right thing is for you. What works for you? What is too much for you? Because what may be too much for me might not necessarily be too much for you. And you've got to figure out what that is for you. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. It's actually kind of linked to the second thing that I think I've spent a lot of time this week reflecting on this. What I've been reflecting on is how can we as parents keep our children safe online? And I think that there is 2 sides to this. I think that there is a philosophical point of view to this, and there is also a practical point of view. And when I talk about a philosophical point of view, I think there is a moral conversation that has to be had around at what point as a parent is too much social media. I think there has to be a conversation around, are there some advantages to social media? I think there is a conversation that has to be had around predators, right? There has to be a conversation around people who are scammers. There has to be a conversation around the fact that somebody can scale something, particularly a business or an idea, much quicker and cheaper online. I think there is that conversation that has to be had. And I think a lot of us, when we're thinking about social media, we, particularly if you're a parent, we simply talk about the negatives of social media. We simply talk about the negatives of the internet. But in reality, if you look at a lot of people, for example, on TikTok, there are a lot of businesses which are on TikTok and use that platform to to endorse certain product or to push their brand forward. You look at places like platforms like Instagram, and you will find that Instagram is a platform where people who are artists, where people who are personal trainers can use the platform in order to push and further their brand, in order to give short clips or demonstrations of what their service is. And I do think that that conversation isn't being had. I think the main conversation which is being had is all about the negatives. And so what ends up happening is, you know, like all of us, we go towards a thing that everybody tells us not to go towards. Now, we can be clever and say, well, if you're an intelligent person, you shouldn't do that. Well, if you are an educated person, you shouldn't go towards that which you know is not good for you. Well, I'm sorry to say, but the reality of life is people do go towards that which is not good for them, right? People do go towards that which everybody's telling them not to go towards, right? People get told, don't touch the fire, they're going to go and touch it. From a psychological point of view, they might understand that touching it, the fire, is gonna get them burned. But the reality of it is, people still go and touch it, right? People have gone, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this guy. I think his name is Nick Cannon. I could be wrong, but he's had, I think, 11 or 12 children. And it's so interesting that he's had these children with different partners. And you would think that as a woman, if a man has had multiple baby mamas, that why would you then go into a relationship with him and then put yourself in a position where you could end up in the same situation? And the reality of life is, it happens, right? There are multiple women who've done and made that decision, who've gotten into a relationship with him, even though they're aware that he has multiple other women, right? And so again, this goes back to the point that I was saying earlier on of looking what is right for us, looking at what best fits what we want, what we need, what works best for us. And you've probably seen that this is a theme throughout what I'm talking about today. Bear with me. This theme and concept of understanding that you've got to really look at what is the right thing for you. You've really got to look at what works best for you. You've got to really look at your life and tailor it to you. I think so many of us in life are living our lives based on generic. You know, like sometimes you can go to a suit shop, and in the suit shop, you can go and buy a generic suit, or you can go to Savile Row, or you can go to a tailor's and have your suit tailor-made. And what I'm encouraging you to do and to really think about is tailoring your life to you, right? Yes, absolutely. There are people out there who are multi-millionaires. There are people out there who are multi-billionaires. There are people out there who are earning 5, 6, 7 figures. That cannot be denied. But the question is, does that work for you and the kind of life that you want? Are you prepared to take on the responsibility? Do you want the pressure? Do you want that level of scrutiny under you? Do you want to be in the spotlight? Because if you decide that you would like huge amounts of wealth, automatically you're going to be put into leadership positions, and the leadership position requires that you live a certain type of way, because there are going to be people looking up to you, there are going to be people who are admiring you, there are going to be people looking to you as an example of what they can become. And you've really got to reflect on that, right? Yes, there are some people who go to the gym 5, 6, 7, 8 days a week, but you've got to look at your life and ask, does that work for me? Right? You've got to look at it in the context of an illness that you may have. You may have, what's the word I'm looking for? An inhaler. So you may have asthma, right? You may have, whatever it may be for you, you may have an illness of some kind, or a handicap of some kind, but you've got to look at your life and tailor it to you. You might have to look at your lifestyle and what is most important to you, because what might be most important to you is your social life, and you've got to tailor your life to meet what you would like in terms of your health and fitness, right? So again, I don't want to overcomplicate what I'm trying to say to you, but my point is, you want to really tailor your life to you. You want to do the research on your life and actually see what works for you. So going back to what I was talking about earlier on about the children. So there is a philosophical aspect of social media, but there is also a second part, which is the practical part. And I wrote down some things here, right? For example, I said that you need to know how the apps work on your children's phones. Right? There's so many people who are worried about their children's social media, yet they do not understand how TikTok works. They don't understand how Snapchat works. They don't understand how Instagram works. How can you protect your child against that which you do not understand how it functions and how it works? And so and this now goes back to what I was saying about the philosophical aspect, part of bringing an awareness to your child and protecting your child is that you've got to actually tell both sides of social media to your child. And in order to do that, you have to study it. You have to actually download it, go through the whole experience of what it's like to have social media, so that you can explain it to your children, so that you can know, right? What else did I write here? You need to continue to have conversations about it. You know, a lot of people, they tend to tell their children social media is bad, or social media this, or social media that, and that's kind of the end of the conversation. A bit like the having sex, the birds and the bees conversation. A lot of people only have the birds and the bees conversation once in their life, and then that is it. They're never going to have it again. And I was having actually, and I don't want to talk about this today, but I was reflecting on this because recently I've been trying to understand why there is still so much domestic abuse that happens in relationship and stuff like that. And this is one of the issues. One of the issues is that we don't talk about relationships. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about how sex works. And so what ends up happening is men and women draw their examples of what a sexual relationship should be like from porn, right? Partly because no one talks about these conversations on a regular basis. So people make assumptions and people draw conclusions. What else did I write here? What's the language of openness about judgment? Yeah, and again, this goes back to the first thing that I was saying. I think when you demonize social media, when your children, it is like 80% of their life, it becomes children have this incredible thing in that children take it, that when you say that something that is part of who they are is bad, they take it that they are bad. Now, you must understand, and as an adult, you have to be clever enough to understand this. You can say to your child that social media is bad, but if you don't understand that social media is children, having Snapchat is who they are, if you don't understand that, then you have a massive issue or error on your hands. Because once you judge that, you are also inadvertently judging the child as well. So that's really important. Also, I think one of the things that's really important is to have family rituals around talking about current topics. This is, I guess, a broader subject, but I was reflecting on how if you start talking about the broader perspective, you start talking about business, you start talking about relationships, you start talking about politics, you start talking about history, you start talking about theft, you start talking about how people dress. In other words, once you start having some deep conversations in your house, things like this become much easier to protect yourself around. When you start thinking about what actually is involved in community, in building a business, when you start breaking things down, what I think begins to happen, and I could be wrong here, but this is the conclusion that I've drawn. When you start talking about life and the different aspects of life, of community, of being, we get a better understanding of our part in everything. And also we start unconsciously pulling things apart. Like, one of the things that I'm constantly telling people is that there is no such thing as something for nothing. There is nothing that is free. There is nothing that doesn't come with a price. And I think part of the reason why I hold this philosophy is because of the experiences that I've had in life. It's because I've studied the dark aspects of life. I've looked at malevolence. I've looked at what a person can, the depths that they can go to when they want something, right? And in fact, I say to people all the time that one of the most important questions that you've got to ask yourself is, what will you not do to become successful? Because if you look at a lot of people who are manipulated, who are used, all of these individuals end up on the dark side of life, or end up being used or manipulated or exploited because they want something really, 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 really badly. That thing can be love. That thing can be to be accepted. That thing can be money. That thing can be fame, success, whatever it is. You look at all of these people who in Hollywood who were involved in the Me Too movement. Many of these people put themselves in positions where they were exploited by these very powerful men in Hollywood, partly because they didn't have a limit. Now, of course, in me saying that does not mean that these people didn't put them in vulnerable positions where they couldn't get out of these situations and put them in positions where they felt they couldn't escape. No, I'm not saying that. I absolutely understand that. But part of how they were exploited is that they didn't have the knowledge and the understanding and the preparation to think, am I going to be in an awkward position? Why am I being invited up into this room? Do I have a phone? Have I told somebody where I am? Is there a PA in the same room, right? All of these different questions that a person has to ask themselves and draw conclusions subconsciously without anyone actually telling them about it. So I do think these conversations, people are just not having hard conversations. I think, and I tell you this because I look at the level of conversations that I have with people, and every time I have a deep conversation, a lot of people don't want to have deep conversations. People don't want to talk about history, politics, malevolence, upbringing. People just don't want to have these conversations. And so what ends up happening is we become exploited by people who understand them. If you don't understand that people are conditioned, then guess what? People who understand conditioning will exploit you. If you don't understand the power, how power dynamics work, and how money and power works, you will be exploited by people who understand how they work. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person or anything like that, but it's important for you to understand how that stuff works. So I think I'm going to leave it there for today. No, I'm not. I'm going to go a bit further before I finish. I want to talk a little bit about there is a difference between happiness and what is important. I've been reflecting a lot on how so many of us in life confuse happiness and importance. We confuse, for example, that money does not lead or bring happiness, but make no mistake, it is important. A single woman raising a child by herself is very good in itself, but it doesn't mean that the father is not important. And I think there's a conversation that has to be had around here. A conversation between, are you confusing happiness with importance? Are you avoiding to do the things that are important because you think that the only thing that matters most is happiness, right? I was having a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about relationships. And one of the questions that I asked my friend was, I said, what percentage of a relationship do you think makes up sex, right? And she said to me, it makes up about 5%. And I said, interesting that you should say that, because I think that sex probably makes up about 30%. And then I said about probably somewhere around 60% of a relationship is duties. It is things like doing the washing, taking the kids, picking up the kids, doing the bedding, hoovering, cooking, cutting the grass, things like going and doing shopping. Those things make up the bulk of a relationship. Now, I get it. Love, of course, has to be there. I'm not stupid. I get it. Sex also has to be there. But my point, and what I was trying to get at with her, is that I think people people pay a huge amount of their time and effort into the love aspect of a relationship that they neglect to notice that the biggest majority of a relationship is actually the boring stuff. And what they neglect to do is understand that, yes, cleaning the floor or cleaning the bathroom may not necessarily lead to happiness, but it's really important. I'll tell you what, if you do not think that these small and mundane things are so significant, listen to people who are divorced or who are getting divorced. When you listen to people who are getting divorced, a lot of them actually love each other. Many times you hear people who are getting divorced say, I still love him, I still love her, but I can't live with her. I can't live with him. I can't do it anymore, right? I think that, and if I remember correctly, that unreasonable behavior was the number one reason for divorce. It wasn't love or falling out of love or sex life. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that there are not some people who get divorced because their sex life is terrible or whatever. But I'm just observing what has been said, and it would seem that a huge amount of the reason why people split up is because of unreasonable behavior. And what I would say to you, and again, is something for you to think about, and again, this is your life, so you got to work out what's most important to you, is to reflect on the things that are actually important. Have you spent any time on those? Look, I get it, money does not lead to happiness, but have you accumulated it? It's really important that you have money, right? Yes, absolutely. Getting married is not the be and all, okay? You don't have to be married to have joy in your life. But I tell you what, it's bloody important for mental well-being and stability and confidence and certainty, not just for you, but for your family as well, right? So these are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about this week. Again, as I began off earlier on by saying, reflect on your own life. Extract some of the lessons and the principles and the keys and the ideas from your own life. Write them down. Have a journal for yourself. Write down all the things that you've been reflecting on and extract them, and one day give them to your kids, right? Have something that you can look back on in 20, 30 years and say, my God, this worked, this didn't work. Ultimately, I guess the question that you want to ask yourself is, are you getting better? Is your life getting better? Are you becoming more productive? Are you becoming healthier? Are you becoming more loving? Does your life have less suffering in it now than it did a decade ago? Right? What things can you extract from your being, from what you've seen and observed and experienced, that is going to move your life forward, that is going to improve your life? Ultimately, if your life is not getting better, if your life is not improving, if you're not growing, if you're not moving forward in your life, then I ask you, what are you doing with your life? Just something for you to think about. So that's where I'm going to leave it today. I really want to thank you so much for listening. I hope that today has added some value to the quality of your life and it's been useful in some way. And if it has, comment below. Tell me what you've been thinking about. I'm always keen to hear people's perspectives. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.